Welcome to Before the Bat, the Gotham podcast, and World's Finest, the DC Comics Review. We're having a crossover event. Why? Because this episode is going to deal with the world of Batman, Nightwing, so I figured we'd get Before the Bat in on this, and World's Finest because we're going to be talking mostly about comic books. Why? Because I had a great honor to interview Devin Grayson. She wrote many Batman, Nightwing, and Titan issues around the period of, let's say, between 1999 and 2006. So sit back, relax, and get ready to hear some greatness. Yeah, I'm just I've been a big DC Comics fan since like the age of 10, so for like awesome. 27 years. Yeah, so like, you know.
Well, for 7 years, so actually my stuff's before your time, technically.
No, 27 years.
Oh, 27 makes more sense. Okay.
Yeah, so like the way people look at like rock stars and like sports, that's how I look at like those of you who like, you know, write the books and
I assure you, we are way nerdier than that.
Yeah, because it just, I'm a little nervous because it's just like, I love these characters, especially like Batman and Nightwing. And
yeah, I do too. So let's just talk. Yeah, take a deep breath. And
yeah,
I totally got into it from the same kind of passion and just being so excited about them that I couldn't imagine living without writing them, and I had no idea how rare and difficult that was to arrange, so I just sort of did it before I knew that you weren't supposed to be able to do that, and
yeah.
So I just feel really lucky. And
I just don't know what that pressure would be like. I mean, for the time you wrote them, I mean, you were the voice of Batman. You were the voice of Nightwing, you know?
It is like the first time you write the word Batmobile in a script and realize someone's paying you for it, like you need to sit back for a second and take a breath and just go, what is happening right now? It is crazy. But I don't know if you do writing at all, but most writers are sort of introverted, and we spend a lot of time alone, staring at computer screens, and the characters just talk to us like they emerge as these full beings, almost like friends in our head. So it becomes almost a compulsion to get it out. You have to write it or it will drive you crazy. So I think in a weird way that takes some of the pressure off, that you're just sort of following this compulsion. It's, I have to get this down.
Yeah. That's what I was going to ask you later on is like, do you ever write a character and does it go a completely different way than you thought it was going to in the beginning?
Always. Yeah, always. And what, in fan fiction or personal writing, you can totally just follow that thread. But in professional comics, you've almost always submitted an outline to an editor ahead of time. So you kind of have to keep the story at least resembling what you initially said you were going to do. And yeah, characters will just go off in all kinds of directions. And you're like, I'm sorry, I did not see that coming. I got to chase that.
Do you have to, well, at least for you, do you have to find like some kind of like commonality with the character almost?
No, actually, I've noticed almost the opposite, that I'm really attracted to characters. The more different they are for me, the more excited I am to kind of get into their head and slip into their skin for a while. And Nightwing in particular, like he's very gregarious, he's outgoing, he's physical, he's just everything I'm not. And I loved seeing the world through that perspective. It was so exciting. And a lot of my connection with him was about how different we actually were.
Yeah, I think that's why I love the character too, because I've always been kind of that's the same way, but he's like the most popular kid in school,
Yeah, he loves everybody. He always has something to say. He's so smart, and he's so in his body all the time and really comfortable there. And so many of us are not comfortable in our skins. And I'm a type 1 diabetic. I have all kinds of health issues. I've just my whole life felt very mortal and very vulnerable physically. And I don't think he feels vulnerable physically at all, ever. He just, whatever happens, he feels like he can handle it. It takes him getting shot multiple times before he'll even sit down and go, I guess I should take a breather, And I loved that about him.
Yeah, that's it. He's the popular guy. All the guys want to be his friend, and all the women want to date him.
Yeah, although I wanted to be him, but I wasn't weird that way.
So do I.
Do him, be him. Do it, be him, be him.
I was going to ask you about the the Nightwing Huntress miniseries you did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you get into like a big popular character like Nightwing, like, do you have to run it by the company? Like, oh, well, I'm gonna have these two characters sleep together.
Yeah, yeah. Well, first of all, you need to get permission to use the other characters, even if they're from the same office. The hardest thing to arrange when you're working with the big companies is to make sure that every character in your story is cleared. You can't just sort of go, okay, and Scarecrow shows up. Like, you really need to check. Is it okay if Scarecrow's over here right now? Or so even with someone like Huntress, who is part of the Bat Office, that's her home, that had to be cleared. And then, yes, you have to be sort of explicit about this is, I want to do a relationship between them, and they'll either say, yeah, let's do something that's sort of ongoing, or you can do that, but you kind of need to put the toys back when you're done and set things back to status quo as much as possible.
And while we're on the subject of them, did you ever think that Dick Grayson and Helena Bertinelli could ever have been a long-term couple, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I don't think they would have been good for each other, but I think they had very strong chemistry. And it's really, their backgrounds are so interesting. And I learned a lot more about that character later from another writer, from when Greg Rucka started doing work on her. He and I were friends, and he talked to me a lot about what he was doing. And my understanding of her deepened so much that I just wanted to run back and redo that whole miniseries. But you can't do that. But she was raised initially Catholic, and she's got these deep sort of guilt issues, and she's very much a sensualist and very interested in. Very attracted to sensation and feeling things on the physical plane, and he's all about that, but without the guilt. And his sort of agenda is always about saving people. So there's a sort of shy vulnerability in her, and a she'll stand up for what she wants, but in a relationship, she's sort of constantly burdened by guilt. And he was just like, "Oh, I'm going to take that away from her," and that's that tension could have put them. They could have been together on that for a long time.
And do you think maybe he saw a little bit of Bruce Wayne in her, maybe?
Absolutely. Yes, there's that too. Very good point. She kind of is like a female Batman, way more than anybody else. And I don't think he saw that consciously. I think that's part of what Oracle kept rolling her eyes about. She's like, oh, God. Like, she's crazy, and he's not going to see it because she's crazy in the same way that Bruce is crazy. And he's just, that's his blind spot. He's like, what are you talking about? Bruce is the most sane person on the planet. So yeah, I definitely there's that attraction too. Although that would have been subconscious for him, which in some ways can make that part of the attraction even more powerful.
Mm-hmm. But you mentioned Oracle.
Mm-hmm.
You had them get engaged at the end of your Nightwing run.
I do, yeah.
Well, did you think that those two were the perfect? That was his perfect match, or?
As far as the comics continuity goes, yeah, I'd say that's the OTP. But it's interesting because there aren't any happy ever afters in those kind of stories, right? There's got to be conflict and stuff continually happening. And I think there are some very major problems in their relationship that they hadn't worked out. So what I wanted to do was get them into the position where they were more forced to have to start trying to work them out. As long as they're dating, they can kind of skate on the edge of that. But if they were actually engaged and together in a significant way, they would really have to start facing some of that stuff. I think they could be an effective couple for each other, but I don't know. I would have liked to see it, and it's sort of what you said in the very beginning about that they surprise you and they go in different directions, the characters. So I've never seen them together long enough to know if it could have lasted, but I really liked it and I was hopeful for it, and I would have loved to explore it.
So did you just do that because you thought that was the natural progression, or I know?
Yeah, it was the right for the story I had been telling. It was the right thing to happen, and he had sort of been all over the place with his romantic life, and knew it, and was trying to ground himself a little more. And she's somebody that he cares about in a much deeper and healthier way. But she certainly knew about all of his dalliances and wasn't particularly, she's like, ugh, I don't know if I can put up with all this. So,
because that was the big question I always had, even just reading it back then. I was like, did you do that because that's what you wanted to do, or wasn't there talk at the time of killing him off in Infinite Crisis?
I think there was, but that was right before I was dismissed from the title, and they were smart enough not to tell me that. I don't think I knew that they were planning on killing him at that point, or I would have
Okay.
really put up a fight. But I did know that they wouldn't let them stay together. And if I had been staying on the title, I would have fought really hard to let them, because I would have assured them I'm not going to have them, get married and be happily ever after. We're going to explore some stuff. But they were really gun shy in that era, and apparently still, it sounds like, about doing long-term committed relationships. I don't know why. I think it probably says more about them than the characters, but.
Yeah. Yeah, I do a review show for DC Comics, and that's what the question was asked for, like, why is there no committed relationships?
Yeah, it's like, you guys, your tells are showing.
Let's see. Oh, I have to talk about one of my all-time favorite Nightwing stories, and it wasn't even in the Nightwing book. It was Gotham Knights, the Hugo Strange story.
Oh, yes, thank you.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
I
love
was
that
fond
story.
of that. My mom is a therapist, so I love that the Hugo Strange character is a psychiatrist and sort of playing with those tropes.
Oh, anytime I try to get anyone into reading comics, like I'm like, you have to read these 4 issues.
Awesome. And I really like that's one of the things you would play with in fanfic or something would be like, what would happen to to Dick if Bruce died? And so to have a way to explore that without actually having it was pretty awesome.
Oh yeah, I even love the ending where Bruce hypnotizes himself.
That's so Bruce. And to not tell anybody he's going to do that, so they're all freaked out and worried, and then just like, oh, I had it under control.
Yeah. Let's see, where should we go? I also loved your Titans run.
Thank you. Yeah.
Besides Nightwing, because we know Nightwing's everyone's favorite. Who was your favorite Titan after Nightwing?
Roy. My other boy is Roy Harper, and I felt like I got to do a lot of work with Arsenal in both the Titans and in a miniseries, and later in an actual licensed publication novel for DC, where I got to develop some more backstory for him. So he was another character that really spoke to me and came through, and I just felt very connected to him.
Mm-hmm. Do you see him as kind of, I don't know, not in every way, but in certain ways, he's like the anti-Dick Grayson?
They're certainly good foils for each other. They're both heroes, so they're not, they can't be anti each other. But he definitely has a different approach, and a different background and different issues, and kind of, I think, in some ways wants to understand Dick better than he actually does. Like they're kind of a little bit of a mystery to each other. They're both very competent and move through the world in a very self-assured way, but neither of them quite can figure out how the other one's doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because
like,
I think
your style doesn't make any sense to me, man.
Yeah, because I think in the what was that, the Batman Arsenal one shot? Yeah, I think you even had Roy tell Batman, he's like, I was kind of jealous of Dick for years, but I knew part of the price of everything he got was having to deal with you.
Exactly, which Roy would not have been able to do at all. And Ollie was such a different kind of mentor than Bruce. I mean, and I think that's really probably the biggest separation between Dick and Roy is not even Dick and Roy, it's Bruce and Ollie. Mm-hmm. And how they were both raised to do the same thing. Like I in my version of things, Ollie really went, "Wow, kid sidekick, that's a cool idea. I'm going to go get one." It's like that is not the cavalier attitude that Batman scooped Dick up with. So it created a very different relationship as we saw play out between Ollie and Roy.
Yeah, and then the Titans Justice League miniseries you did.
Titans JLA, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's JLA Titans. Technus Imperative, yeah.
Yeah. What kind of challenges is that to write a story with that many characters?
That was yes, there was blood, sweat, and tears behind that one. What made it bearable was that I did that with Phil Jimenez, and he was my co-writer on that, as well as the artist, and so he held my hand. But we literally spent days running up and down the halls of DC, running drafts by different editors and going, "Is this okay? Is this okay?" And when you have that many characters all in a book, every single editor involved with any one of those characters has to sign off on it. So you'd literally have days where you've got, 6 down, 2 to go, and the 8th guy's like, no, no, I don't think Martian Manhunter would know. And you're like, you have to rewrite everything and go back to the board. So that was a real labor of love. And I think I even said in an interview somewhere that what you actually see there is probably the 36th draft of the story or something. But that it came out as well as it did despite that. It was really exciting. And we love all those characters, so we were in it for the long haul. But yes, it's kind of an editorial nightmare to. It was like, the summer event crossovers where you get all the books together. It was like doing
Oh
one
yeah.
of those, but in just three supercharged issues all by yourself. So,
Is there a character you would have loved to write monthly and you never got a chance to?
well, I was saying I was very lucky in that I did get to write everybody I wanted to write, and my focus coming into DC Comics was really oddly narrow. I was just super obsessed with Batman and Nightwing and their relationship, and that's really what I focused my whole career there on. And was really happy to be able to circle that as many times as I did and in as many ways as I did. I think over the course of the time I was there, I wrote almost everybody at least once. But if I would have loved to have done more with Roy Harper and maybe done like an Arsenal monthly. I think I pitched that a couple times, but it never quite took off.
I really enjoyed your Catwoman arc.
That was my first, the first regular series that I did for DC. So that's some of my earlier work. I'll take Manhattan. I loved her because she's someone who has relationships with objects instead of people, which is so much fun to work with, especially in a visual medium where you can actually show those objects. And she's a great character. I really, because of who I am, I'm kind of a tomboy and I'm openly bisexual, and I'm very geared into the male characters, and so I fought really hard against being asked to do female characters all the time. But she was really kind of the one exception. I was just completely comfortable with her right away and really enjoyed every minute of working with her. So she's pretty special to me too.
Did you relate to Catwoman at all?
I guess so, except you still have to lock down a history. I mean, I guess you to make more of the decisions about it, but you still figure out pretty quickly where that character came from, and you can't really stray from that. What I found difficult about it is that I'm not a criminal mastermind, and to try to think of crimes every month was harder. Like that sounds funny, but what does she do? I don't know. How do you get through these systems? And some of the research I did was hysterical, sort of calling people up and like, so how exactly do your alarm systems work? No, no, no. I'm asking for a friend. But Batman's a genius, so that's nearly impossible to write. She's a criminal mastermind. That's really hard to write. The challenges are about their specialties and getting yourself versed up enough in their skill sets that you can sound credible moving them through their days.
Where did the inspiration for the Tarantula character come from?
I wanted to do a Latina character, and I think I was asked to recreate Tarantula. I'm trying to remember, but I wanted a particular character, a foil for Dick to play off of, and what I really wanted to look at was someone who had the same ideals as the bad guys, as Bruce and Dick and everybody, but came from a very different socioeconomic background and a very different reality, where the law didn't look quite as appealing to them. Someone who was way more disenfranchised. So a little bit like Catwoman in the terms of having a very different experience of moving through the world than the two rich white guys did. But with even more of a sense of like she truly believed she was one of the good guys and wanted to serve justice completely, but her sense of what was fair and what the world would grant you was so wildly different from theirs that it really set her up to do things in a very different way, and it took Dick a long time to realize how different. But what I was looking at was sort of like social disenfranchisement, and if you came from a background like that, but then were given the chance to do that kind of justice and vengeance work, what would it look like to you?
Not to touch on a sore subject, but let's talk about the Nightwing rape.
Go ahead, yeah.
That angered me for the longest time. But now that I'm older, I think I see where you're going with that.
Well, I've spoken of that publicly many times, and it was a mistake. You're absolutely within your right to be angry. It was not well thought out, not just because of sort of being socially insensitive, but because it didn't work in the story. It distracted from the story I was trying to tell. It didn't enhance it. And I had meant it sort of almost metaphorically in the sense that look how much control she has over him. But rape isn't metaphorical. It's a real thing that's happened to real people and has real repercussions. And that just really didn't work. And for me, that story was supposed to be about Blockbuster's murder. And I was so focused on that as writer that I was sort of missing this other huge thing that I was doing. Like that to me, that was almost just a side note, and that of course became the main focus of that story for everybody, and it's what people remember, and it's unquestionably the biggest mistake I've ever made in print. So I do regret it, and I hear your anger, and I apologize. And I think the even worse than making the mistake was that I was off the book so quickly after that. I never really got the chance to have him process any of that and have it have a meaningful resolution, which just sort of made things even worse.
Were you just pumped to write that story and your excitement got the best of you?
Sure. Well, yeah, a lot of, I mean, your emotions are really wrapped up. You're excited about the art. By that time, you're visualizing what things are going to look like. And I could really see that scene in my head. And I loved the visual of aren't they kind of, they're silhouetted in that moment. And so I really, like, there was visual dynamics that I was excited about and distracted by. And you have an editor who you're running things off of, and he really loved the idea. Now I'm like, dude, why didn't you tell me to back off? That was a terrible idea. But yeah, sure, you're wrapped up in the moment, and I was trying to find ways to demonstrate what was happening emotionally, but I used something that you can't use. I used a shortcut that doesn't work as a shortcut that way. And believe me, I'm equally outraged when I see rape in stories, especially when it's done badly, or it's not really central to what's happening. So I'm sort of amazed that I myself did that, but it was a tremendous learning experience. I guess that's the good thing that came out of it.
Was the whole Crutches storyline Dick dealing with the trauma of the whole rapes thing?
He was a little bit, yeah. But also, and then the other component comes into it as editorial edict. At that point, I was told he had to be out of costume for, I forget, like 6 months or something crazy. So I didn't really have an authentic reason for him to be out of costume, and I had to come up with something that made sense. And God, I'm trying to remember, how did he get injured? I don't even remember. But I think that also came down from editorial. And
he was shot in War Games.
Right. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Oh, yes. And he had to be removed from that situation because otherwise he would have been too effective. It was crazy. And so you're juggling your own personal ideas, but then you're getting these editorial mandates. And at that point, I was in the middle of what, if it had been successful, would have been a 2-year long arc. And when you can pull those off and you have a fluid story running uninterrupted for 2 years, they can be brilliant because the readers have so much time to get invested and go on the ups and downs. But what usually happens, and what happened in this case, is that you get cut off by other events and you can never quite finish what you started to do. So I had this story that was sort of dragging him down to the pit of despair, and he reaches this absolute nadir. And of course, the idea is to build him back up and make everything perfect and great again. And I absolutely could not. I was just thwarted at every turn. He makes this deal with Slade to save Bloodhaven, and in my outline, it's absolutely successful. It has to be, right. His redemption is predicated on it. But of course, what happens next? They blow up the whole city. So, as much as I loved writing Nightwing, my last couple months on it were pretty miserable.
Do you like writing longer story arcs and do crossovers of like all the Bat books? Just an example, get in the way.
Well, if you're doing independent work, yeah, totally. It's interesting because unlike most other written mediums, it's very collaborative. And I guess film and theater is the same way to some extent. But with most writing, if you're writing a short story or a novel, you're totally alone with it. Everything that happens is because you put it on the page or you didn't. And with comics, there's so many more people involved, and you have the visual element coming in. I think I love long story arcs, and I think in TV, for instance, we're seeing a return to longer story arcs, and people are clearly binge watching is the new term now for it, and really eating it up and liking being involved with characters for longer time and watching slow development. But it's actually a very difficult thing to do in mainstream superhero comics, especially with, I think, they had those events almost every summer or something. So it probably wasn't really a good place to be trying to do that. If you were doing an independent title or something that you had complete control over, then yeah, it's a wonderful medium for it. But in mainstream superhero work, it was it was challenging.
Do you like Batman and Nightwing as more street level characters? I know I do.
Yeah, I liked them as street level characters better, I think. And that just for me, that's what I'm more comfortable with. the allegory of superheroes and the idea of, mythological beings with these amazing powers it's really cool, and it's been part of our culture for eons, and I really respect it. But as a writer, it doesn't interest me as much as just basic human psychology. So I really kind of like it best when we're looking at the people under the costumes, and having them do as regular things as possible. But you have to display their extraordinary talents and skills, of course. But yeah, I kind of like them as close to street level as can be. Although one of the advantages of working in comic books is that there's no special effects budget, and I do love blowing things up because you can just get these great explosions and it doesn't cost anything. And
You can push the boundaries in comic books, right? Nothing is too big. There's no special effects budget.
well, exactly. And imagine doing that in a movie and how much money and coordination it takes. And in a comic book, you're like, 2-page spread, do it, and off an artist goes. Just cost some orange ink. That's it.
What was your favorite Titans arc?
Ooh, from my run. I think the one where they're on the island, and they're kind of the forced vacation that turns into a nightmare. I that was really fun because they were, the newness of being together and a team had worn off, and they were back to being on each other's nerves, and that was really fun to write because there's so much love amid those characters, but there's also tension, and they've known each other forever, and I'm sure there's things they just drive each other up a wall with. So that was fun to play with, and sort of to get to have little glimpses into their pasts and their fantasies, and a little bit of magic can sometimes be very illuminating. What was your favorite?
That would probably be my favorite. Like, that's why I was like, I bet you that's probably her favorite. It's my favorite.
Well, it's interesting that I think readers can often sense the energy when a creator is very excited about something they do. Somehow that energy gets translated into the work and comes across. So I always love hearing that other people respond to it too.
Mm. Oh yeah. I did want to. You said if you would have had your way, you probably would have had Dick Grayson come out as bisexual.
Well, now there's the term in fandoms, headcanon. Do you know? Do you know that? Yeah. So it's kind of always been my headcanon about him. I don't know how much I ever expected to or needed to push that in the actual comics. I totally understand why they haven't gone there. And it's not something I would have spent a lot of energy trying. Like, you can barely get them to put females in comics. I have some patience. I know we're not quite there yet. I do think it's a really interesting aspect of his character, and I think, I feel like the millennials are ready to go there. So it's very close to time to explore something like that. I guess, yes, I would have liked to do that. I never expected to do that. I didn't walk away going, man, they wouldn't let me. I don't think I even ever really brought it up in any serious way. But in my head, that was a reality about who he was. And so it sort of informed some of his interactions.
Let's see.
What do you think? Do you think the readership is ready for that, or?
I don't know. I know back then, I know they weren't, but they might be today.
It's certainly closer anyway, right? I think we'll start exploring things like that soon. But maybe not right there, and that would be okay. I'm totally fine with a character who's been around for 50 years not being the one that they sent out on that particular mission. But for me, it just made sense in terms of how physical he is, and but it also, I'm not sure he was ready to express it, so it was totally fine not having it be overt in the books.
Yeah, that's the only thing I would think is, like, even if that would come to pass, that would he be worried about Bruce's reaction? Totally,
exactly right, and so he would really tamp down on it for that very reason, and that could be a fascinating story and something really fun to explore, but it takes up a lot of space and energy in a series of stories that doesn't necessarily need that extra piece. So.
And let's see. What gave you the idea of having Bruce adopt Dick?
It's interesting. The language was that Dick was his ward, and the story, emerged in 1939. That was totally normal language, and that would have been a normal way of going about things. But by 2001, or whenever I wrote that story, nobody's anybody's ward anymore. You never hear that. It's so. one solution would have just been to retcon it and say that he'd always been adopted. But I felt like there is a difference between being somebody's ward and being their adopted son. And the difference is sort of an implied lack of familial connection. It's like, I'm legally responsible for you, but you're not my own. And I feel like that tension resonated in their relationship for the 50 years that he was his ward, even though it wasn't really 50 years. It's always the confusion of how chronology works in these kind of stories. But they definitely acted like people who that guy was that guy's ward. And it was time to move that relationship forward. So legally, obviously, Dick's an adult, and being legally adopted by Bruce at that point doesn't really mean anything. But emotionally and linguistically, I felt like it was important to have Bruce acknowledge that, hey, that language made sense at one point, but I do think of you as a son, and I need you to know that. And especially because in the intervening years, he had adopted other people, like Jason Todd. And so just to me, like, that just drove me crazy. When Jason Todd is Bruce's adopted son, but Dick Grayson isn't, I can't even. But it seemed like a good thing to actually walk up to in a story, and a nice gesture on Bruce's part to kind of say, oh, this was an oversight and I'm fixing it.
Yeah, it did seem to come from a genuine place on Bruce's part, but I also thought that, like, Bruce was such, like, the master planner, he thinks, like, 10 steps ahead, that, like, right. it could also be, like, one night, the Joker might kill me, I might not come home, so I want to inherit everything, and...
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's a very good point, and I'm sure he has iron tight, wills and stuff, and all that stuff's well worked out. But he's also got a little bit of the sense of being immortal and trying to go on forever. So yeah, there's some question, like, has he been super clear about his legacy and what he wants to have happen? And that is definitely a way of communicating that more strongly and of protecting Dick. And but I think mostly it was just an acknowledgement of, like, yes, you are meaningful to me. I do think of you as a son. And if this silly piece of paper means that, then here. And Dick understood it. He understood the gesture.
Yeah, I just always love those storylines, and it always intrigues me when, like, someone comes up with a twist like that, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's been around for decades. Why didn't I ever think the question,
Yeah, well, and for 30 years, all the way up into the 60s, you wouldn't have even blinked. You would have, oh, he's his ward. That makes sense. But, like, by the 70s, that started to be a kind of a loaded term. Like, why is he his ward? Was he in trouble with the court? Is Dick Grayson somebody that the state of Gotham is watching over, and they've appointed Bruce his guard? Like, it's suddenly the meaning changes because of the way that we use language, and so the language of their relationship needed to catch up with contemporary times.
I know you said you're not reading DC currently, but do you watch any of the TV shows like Gotham or Flash or Arrow?
I do watch Flash. My 8-year-old loves it, so we gather for that religiously. He would not let us miss it. It's so fun to watch that through a kid's eyes. He's just delighted by that superpower. I don't watch Gotham, and I was just talking with my husband about that because he's like, they're going to ask about that. It's interesting. I love Batman more than life itself, and nothing about that show appealed to me. So I'm kind of intrigued by how little interest I have in it. Some of it is that I just really don't have much of a threshold for camp where Batman's concerned. I grew up in the era of the dark and sober Batman, and I kind of like it that way. But also the premise feels kind of flawed to me. It's so important that the Batman villains are in response to Batman. The whole concept kind of troubles me, but I'm glad that people are excited about it, and that, any interest in Gotham is good for all of us. So
yeah, I like the show.
Yeah,
I like it, but that's the one part that bothers me, that it's just like, well, if the police can handle these guys without Batman, then what's the need for Batman?
Yeah. And also, even more than that, isn't it kind of exploring the origins of a lot of the supervillains, but before there's a Batman? Like, a lot of them should be in response to Batman, and that's such a critical part of Batman's burden that he carries around, is the fear that he created some of these people as much as that he keeps them in check. And if you take that out of his legend, I don't know, I find that really short-sighted. It's gonna really damage his interpretation as a character later.
Yeah, but there is if you could find it, I know it's on Netflix now, but season 1 of Gotham, there's an episode where they go to the Haley Circus, and you get to see John and Mary Grayson. And I think
Yeah,
she's
that's just
pregnant at
fun.
that point. Yeah.
On the high wires. Yeah, it's good. It's interesting. We're obsessed as a culture with the idea in fiction of making things happen as early as possible in people's lives. And I, I was talking to somebody about the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, and she was pointing me to some. I think it's a book that somebody read or something, but wrote. But it takes the Norrington character all the way back to like he's like 8 and he runs into Jack Sparrow, and like she was clearly very moved by this and telling me this story and how dramatic it was. And I was like, why do we feel the need to do that all the time? Why does it matter that these characters met when they were kids? It's like as an adult, do the people that you knew as 8, do they really have that much impact on you? I don't know. I just find it kind of funny, but that we're so obsessed.
Yeah. Prequels kind of get to me too. It's kind of
Yeah.
like, well, this person's going to survive and this person's going to
Does
survive.
Peter Pan need an origin story?
Oh, yeah.
Some things are better left alone.
Uh,
And what was the other one? Oh, Arrow. Yes, I watch Arrow
Yeah.
on and off. That one's fun.
If they ever asked, would you be interested in writing any episodes for Flash or Arrow?
Yeah, totally. Oh, that would be a blast. Yeah, they don't though. We're totally separate groups. The comic group and the TV group rarely cross. You have to be at like the utter highest echelon to go back and someone. You have to be a Jeff Johns. Nobody else does that.
Ugh, I never understood that.
They're just well, think about it this way: the comics come from the publishing industry, which until recently was mostly based in New York, and all the TV and movie stuff is in Hollywood. Like they're literally different industries. They're different groups of people, and although we know that the skill sets are hugely similar, like writing a comic script and writing a TV script is almost identical, but that you literally so much of what actually happens in terms of assignments is about who's running into who and creating creative partnerships, and those two groups just haven't been in contact recently. So it'll be interesting to see if DC's move to California changes that might have been part of their strategy there.
Huh. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. But yeah, comics is still firmly entrenched in the publishing world, and the publishing world is on its head. It's going through huge changes because of the release of digital reading material and stuff. So it'll be really interesting to see where it all comes out.
I guess I'm old-fashioned. I still have to hold a physical copy in my hand.
Me too. I love that. But I love the opportunity that people now have to self-publish and the different ways of playing with the media. It's just really interesting to watch an entire sort of culture and industry have to change to keep up with the times. It's an interesting thing to be in the middle of.
Oh,
like
yeah.
if you were a newspaper reporter right now, my God,
Yeah,
what
I
would
know.
you be doing besides panicking?
Guess trying to get on a website, I guess.
Right, exactly. Is TMZ hiring help?
I think that's most of what I had for you, but what are you working on right now?
I'm actually doing a lot of long prose fiction. I'm working on a novel about pirates in the early 18th century, and I've been doing some graphic novel adaptations for Random House Penguin. They've been taking some books like Tamara Pierce's series and turning them into really long graphic novels, which is super cool. So you sort of get to introduce a whole new audience to both her books and or to comics, depending on which side they're coming from. So we just finished, gosh, I think it was like 140 pages. It's really long. And I'd done some of those for Scott Westerfeld's Uglies series previously. So it's fun that the publishing houses are getting more interested in graphic material. So I've been helping them with some of that.
And do you want to tell everyone where they could find you social media wise, or?
Sure. I have a new website up these days, which is devingraysoncentral.com. And I try to sort of keep that updated with what's going on with work and stuff. It's so funny with writing because you're always working on something that is not going to see the light of day for like 2 years. So it's frustrating. I'm like, yeah, I know there haven't been any updates, but trust me, I'm working on stuff. It's coming. I am at Gothamette on Twitter, and I have a Devin Grayson, I think author is the name of my Facebook fan page. And I'm on Tumblr, but I'm undercover as a role player, so you have to find me. Can you find my fandom?
All right, and before we go, I just wanted to tell you again, I really enjoyed all your work on like on the bat, on all the DC titles, and
Thanks so much.
I mean, and just I don't know, just reading comics has got me through some like hard times, especially your work. I mean, I had some down times where some of the only bright spots were reading your work.
Oh, that's really nice to hear. Thank you. I'm sorry that you went through hard times, but it's amazing to hear that something I wrote helped with that. That's great. That's very meaningful.
Yeah. So thank you very much. It was
It's
an honor.
my pleasure. Yeah, and you have my email address and stuff, so if something occurs to you later and you want to do a quick follow-up email or something, please feel free.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet. All right. Be
All right.
well, Philip.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye. So pretty great stuff, huh? I know I had a good time. It's so great. I wish any other comic creators, if you want to talk to us, please feel free. I would love to interview more comic creators, especially Batman and Nightwing. Those are like my two favorite characters. Well, any creators or any fans, if you want to get a hold of us, well, for Before the Bat, you can email us beforethebat@gmail.com. On Facebook, we're Before the Bat, the Gotham Podcast. On Twitter, we're at Before the Bat Pod. I've been live tweeting every Monday night, live with Gotham, 8 Eastern, so, feel free to join me. For World's Finest, you can email me, nightwingpdp@gmail.com, and on Twitter, I'm at nightwingpdp, and World's Finest, the DC Review, has its own Facebook page. Drop by, give us a like, share your thoughts there with me and everyone else. And until next time, that's it. Until then, same bat time, same bat channel, the Gotham Podcast, and World's Finest.